Hello and welcome back to Bookish and welcome back to my Saturday Hodgepodge. This one's going to be a little bit different because in this one I'm going to answer the questions that you asked me in response to my 1,500 subscriber Q&A announcement last Saturday. So this will just all be questions. Let me say again how much I appreciate everybody who watches my channel, subscribes, supports my channel, all the friends I've made through this platform, this format, which I didn't expect to make, which is really enrich my life in lots of ways. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to the people who submitted questions. I also want to just really quickly try to rectify something that happened this week. This week on Tuesday I posted the World Book Day tag, and in that I whined about nobody tagging me. Leo from A Little Book Life actually tagged me that day or the day before, and I hadn't gotten to that video yet, and I should have acknowledged that in the show notes of that video, but I didn't. So this is me saying thank you, Leo, for tagging me to do the World Book Day tag. I enjoyed that tag. I enjoyed getting outside with the dogs and doing that tag, and thank you. If you haven't checked out Leo's channel, I'll leave a link to his channel down below. Let me just say that Leo is pretty amazing and a great booktuber with, I would say, impeccable taste. Anyway, so here we go. I got a lot of questions. This is probably going to be the longest video I've ever put up on my channel, so, you know, bear with me. And we go along, and, you know, if you get bored with the stories, feel free to fast forward or whatever you want to do. So the first question came from Matthew at the Mayberry Book Club. He said, could you talk about some of your favorite fishing memories or memorable fishing trips? I took a lot of fishing trips with my grandpa. He was the person who liked to go fishing, or at least he liked to spend time with me, so he tolerated going fishing. And that's where my love of fishing came from. I enjoyed fishing with both my kids, even though neither one of them really likes to fish that much, and that's fine. You don't have to like doing what Dad went. Occasionally they tolerated it and went with me, and it was always fun when they caught fish and spending time with them. But the story I tell is going to be is not going to be family oriented at all. It's not that risque. But anyway, so this story involves going fishing in college. When I was in college, you know, I found out at some point in college that one of my best friends in college also liked to fish. And so one night after, well, one Saturday night, early Sunday morning, after, you know, an evening full of what a lot of American college students do in their spare time recreationally, he and I came up with this brilliant idea that we would get up early on Sunday morning and we would drive out to Lake Sam Rayburn, which was the biggest lake, one of the greatest bass fishing lakes in the United States, biggest lake near where we went to college, and we would drive out to Sam Rayburn and go fishing. He said if I would come pick him up and wake him up, he would make me breakfast, and we'd go out there. So probably, you know, 2.5 hours after the party ended and we went home, I woke up at around, I don't know, 4:30 in the morning. I got dressed, I put my fishing stuff in my car, I drove over to his apartment and knocked on his door. There was no answer. Eventually his roommate answered the door, and his roommate was wearing only his underwear and had apparently been up working out the entire time. I had to go wake my friend up. He made me breakfast, such as it was. I think there was like, we each had a piece of bacon and an egg. He was really not feeling particularly well that morning, probably because of the activities from the night before. So we got in my car, we headed out. He was really pale and white and didn't feel very good. We stopped along the way to get coffee and something to drink, and then we headed out to Lake Sam Rayburn. By the time we got there, it was already pretty hot because it was a longer drive than I imagined. It took longer to get breakfast and drive there. So we get out there, and we're going to bank fish because we didn't have a boat. So we get out there and we find our spot. You know, we waited, get close enough to the water. We had to kind of wade through mud. My friend was still really tired. Fortunately, he brought like a beach blanket to lay on. He laid his beach blanket out in the mud, and he laid down. I made my first cast, and when I made my first cast, the reel on my rod flew off because I hadn't secured it properly. It flew off into the water, and it took me like 20 minutes to recover it. Boats full of fishermen kept going by and laughing at us with my friend kind of laid out on the beach in a semi-conscious state, and me struggling to fish with now soggy, wet equipment. And it was really one of the worst fishing trips of my life, but memorable, and I think it's a funny story. There's some other parts that I chose not to tell you because, I want to keep this PG. Question number 2 came from Jennie Johnson. What is the most surprising influence that BookTube has had on your reading? And I've said this a couple of times, but I'm just going to repeat it. That the thing I look forward to the most every year, in the couple of years I've been on BookTube, is Victober, and BookTube has really influenced me to read more Victorian literature and to really like it and to experiment and read different authors, and that's just really been the most surprising influence. If you told me that was going to happen when I started my BookTube channel, I would have told you we're crazy. Deanie, and that's the name of her channel, asked me a couple of questions. First, what is your fondest memory from your teaching career? And then what is your proudest moment for your teaching career? My fondest memory from my teaching career was right around year 5, I think. I was teaching. By then I was fairly confident that I knew what I was doing, had a really first rough year. But around year 5, for some reason, I had a class that started after the lunch period, which only had like 10 or 11 students in it. Now, back then, my classes were pretty small. It was unusual for me to have a class of more than 21 or 22 students. To put that in comparison today, now I teach 136 students over six different class periods. But I had this really small class, and that was really just great. I got to know all of those students. They were really great students in the sense they were fun to teach. They were funny and open. I got to know them. I got to kind of know what worked and what didn't work. I could understand when they were getting things and when they weren't, and it was just a really great teaching experience, and I think a really good argument for small classes and how much better they can be. My proudest moment has to do with a student that I taught who now teaches at the very place where he graduated from school and where I teach. He was also a student of my wife's, and I know for a fact she had a much greater influence on him than I did, but he was not a great student. There were some issues with him in terms of learning, but just a really great personality, great person. He came back to teach, and I have to tell you, the thing I'm proudest of, even though I don't know that I had a lot of influence over him, is how great a teacher he is, because he is a great teacher. So that's my proudest moment. So the next question came from Sonya at Enthusiastic Reader. Where would you like to travel after retirement and after the pandemic? That's a long list. So here we go. In order, I guess, of where I'd like to go the most. Scotland, Scandinavia, including Finland, Iceland, let's see, Germany, Austria, the Czech Republic, Spain, Portugal, let's see, what's that? The Dordogne area of France, the Cinque Terre area and Florence of Italy, Cambodia, Perth, Australia, let's see, Botswana, Egypt, Morocco, Chile, Cuba. That's where I want to go in retirement. I'll actually be lucky if I get to one of those places. My wife and I had actually kind of planned a trip for Scotland for the summer, at least began imagining it, which is where I want to go first. Because I have Scottish ancestry, but pandemic meant that is not going to happen. James Holder, and that's the name of his channel too, he asked me, how many books do you own? How do you organize them? How often, if ever, do you rearrange your collection? So I counted, just an estimate, I own somewhere between 800 and 900 books that are on the shelves in these rooms. I forgot to count the books in a different shelf, and I didn't count the books which hide behind anyway, so if you're looking at the books, then the books that face out from my bookshelf is between 800 or 900. Organize them, they're alphabetized by author's last name, or in nonfiction, they're alphabetized by, they're not alphabetized, but they're arranged by subject, and then when I remember alphabetized by author's name, I have them grouped with classics on the top left, then poetry, then all the fiction, all the novels that I have are on the rest of the shelves. The very bottom shelf is the shelf for world history and art are on the bottom shelf. These shelves over here on my left are where I keep most of my nonfiction, and it starts with biography, and then it goes into American history, arranged kind of chronologically by subject. There's a whole shelf for issues involving or books about Sub-Saharan Central Africa. There are some world history books over here I just noticed, and then I have books of short stories. Take up about 3 shelves. I've crammed all my old fantasy books into one shelf. I have religion and then what I would call spy books and detective fiction mysteries on the bottom left shelf, and I need to clear off some of these shelves with some of my work papers from a while ago to make more room. And no, I don't really think about rearranging them, even though I do. There's actually a video of that. I rearrange them when I need more space. Anyway, there you go. That's the answer to that question. Kristen Anne asked, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given? What's one of your pet peeves? What were the first couple of BookTube channels you started watching? The best piece of advice I've ever been given is that when you're wrong, say you're wrong as soon as possible. That when you know you're wrong, and this happens a lot in arguments, but when you know you're wrong, when you know that you're not right, whether we're talking about a philosophical argument or argument with a partner, the sooner you say, I was wrong, and you apologize, the better it's going to be. It is a huge relief, and I realize this is going to sound political because it is, but there is such a relief in being able to just admit that you were wrong, that you didn't do it right, that you got it wrong. It relieves you of that burden of always having to justify something you know is wrong. That's the best piece of advice I've ever gotten. Pet peeves, let's see. Pet peeves. Oh, my pet peeve right now is the compulsion so many people have to take a picture of every single thing that happens. I realize there's some irony in this since I have 2 YouTube channels, but this idea that we need to photographically record every single thing is really just bothers me. It bothers me to see people who are out at, let's say, a site or out having a great time, stop having a great time to take, the perfect selfie, or stop having a great time to take like 15 pictures of a view. I don't have a problem with taking a picture of a view or of your friends, but every single time, you're not going to keep those pictures anyway. I'd rather, and this is an old man thing, I'd rather record the memory than try to get the perfect picture. The first channels I followed on BookTube, Katie from Books and Things, who I still follow and I watch all of her videos. I think she was one of the first. I think the Bald Book Geek was one of my first follows, and then there's kind of a YA fantasy channel called the Peruse Project. I think those were the first, or among the first 3 channels that I followed, and I still follow 2 of them. I don't follow the Peruse Project anymore, just because I don't read a lot of YA fantasy. And I do follow some channels with people who read that, but I feel like I have a much more real connection with them as booktubers, so I stopped following the Peruse Project. The others, I believe, I still follow. Alan Morton says, to what do you contribute your success? What do you do that the other 8.5 people that he shouted out in the video don't do? He said it certainly can't have anything to do with the books you read. If you don't know, Alan likes to poke fun at me, essentially about everything. I think it's because he has a very sophisticated English accent, and I have this one. He's hillbilly shaming me. But what I would say is that what separates me and is the reason for my support, Alan, or my success, Alan, is the support of booktubers like you who comment on and watch my videos. So thank you, Alan, for that question. The fellows over at the Codex Cantina had 3 questions. First, can you reflect on your view of BookTube and how it has changed over time? I think the part of BookTube that I'm in has gotten better. I haven't been here all that long, just 2.5 years. It's not like other people have been around 5 or 6 years, but the part of BookTube that I consider myself to be a part of, and there are lots of different communities in BookTube, and that's fine, it has been growing. And that is, I think, a group of people who really want to be friends with one another, who want to have conversations about books, who take books seriously from all kinds of different genres, who don't limit themselves to one thing. One of the things I think has changed is that people's use of technology has picked up. I'm not really great, I just kind of record the talking head video, but I'm constantly impressed with how many different varieties of channels there are and how many different ways in which people can do their booktube channels, and that seems to have changed a lot for me over time. Question 2 from them was, once you're fully retired, how will your YouTube book fishing interactions change? I will probably post more videos on my long neglected fishing channel. That of the things that I have to do, that's the things which I've been doing the least often. To be honest with you, filming fishing videos is really time consuming, and unlike filming a booktube video where you talk about books, you know, if I go out to fish and I'm out fishing for 3 or 4 hours and I don't catch anything, well, I really don't have a video there, do I? Whereas with a book, well, I can always talk about the book. So I'll try to do more of that. And then one of my favorite questions from them was, who is the greatest wrestler of all time? So I listed the 3 greatest wrestlers of all time, and I'm going to go through them in reverse order. By the way, you should know that I watched a lot of wrestling when I was a young man in the early 80s, and back then, living in the South, the wrestling we watched was Mid-South wrestling. You know, the WWE, etc. wasn't a big deal yet. There was like local or area or regional wrestling, and Mid-South wrestling is what I watched. So number 3, greatest wrestler, Andre the Giant. Number 2, Mr. Wrestling 2. Mr. Wrestling 2 was just this kind of, I guess he was kind of an in-shape, sort of chubby guy, and his famous move was the knee lift, and somehow he had to get you bent over in the ring, and then he would run up and essentially, you know, hit you in the chin with his knee, and this apparently was just a devastating blow. The absolute best wrestler of all time, though, is, of course, the Junkyard Dog. That's the right answer. JYD with the thump. Favorite wrestler of all time. Marian Ryan asks, what were your favorite TV shows as a kid outside of detective shows you talk about pretty much? So I went through these and tried to think about these. Scooby-Doo, absolute favorite. The Banana Splits. I don't know if you guys remember the Banana Splits. They were guys in like these weird animal costumes who were probably supposed to be high all the time, and they ran around and did stupid stuff, and they had these weird little cartoons and shows that were a part of their show. Gilligan's Island, you know, stereotypical man of my age. By the way, Marianne, far more beautiful than Ginger. The Benny Hill Show. Once I got a TV in my own room, I found reruns of the Benny Hill Show on a channel, and I watched the Benny Hill Show. Also Monty Python, which was on PBS, and Fawlty Towers. Those are probably my favorite shows as a kid. If we go from, you know, like the age of 6 to around the age of 14, those would be my favorite shows. Bits of Lit asks, what's your favorite meal to cook and how do you make it your own? Okay, this is kind of problematic. My favorite meal to cook is like seared baked salmon, which I like a lot. And I guess if there's one thing I do to make that my own is I add kind of this special seafood seasoning to it. But the thing I think that I make that's really my own is a grilled shrimp, which my 2 important ingredients there are lime and cayenne pepper. Those 2 things make my grilled shrimp my own. Courtney Ferriter asks, how do you feel about buddy reads? How do you choose which books to buddy read? Do you try to do a certain number per month or year, or just as they come up? I love buddy reads. I do. They're really fun. I usually let my buddy choose the books, and then I do them as they come up, and I look forward to it every time. I will say that I'm still a little introverted about going out and proposing buddy reads, and so I don't think I've proposed very many buddy reads, but I do enjoy them a lot. Elizabeth from the Bookish North asks, what has been your favorite sports moment as a spectator? Okay, well, let's see, in real life, my 2 favorite sports moments. One is I got to go to an Ohio State-Michigan football game. If you don't know, that's an American football game between 2 college teams who are bitter rivals, and it's just referred to as the game. Ohio Stadium, the Horseshoe, holds around 113,000 people, and it was incredibly packed, and it was incredibly intense, and I'm an Ohio State fan, and they won. They beat Michigan. So there's that, and also my second favorite was I got a ticket. Me and my friends got tickets to go to what could have been Nolan Ryan's 300th win. That's a baseball game, and Nolan Ryan is a pitcher in baseball, and 300 wins is a rare thing for a pitcher to have won 300 games. So we got tickets to that game. Unfortunately, Ryan got a no decision in that game, so he didn't get his 300th win, but I did get to go to that. Other than that, watching my kids play sports is probably an obvious answer. I really like that. I would have mentioned the Astros winning the World Series, but there's another question, which I'll talk about that later. I was really happy, I guess, and surprised there were so many sports questions. Harold Niver asks, what team sports are you a fan of? Well, this is going to be a longer answer. You should know I love almost all sports. Of all the sports that I don't love, or the sports I don't love, probably professional basketball is my least favorite. But when I tell you I love sports, I will say that I watch sports. I watch track and field. I watch rugby. I love Premier League soccer. I watch golf. I'll watch swimming. I like cricket. I'll watch ping pong. And then American football, tennis, hockey, what am I forgetting? Baseball. I do like college basketball, all those sports. My favorite teams, my favorite pro football team are the Houston Texans. My favorite college football team, the Ohio State Buckeyes. My favorite baseball team, Astros. Again, I'll talk about this later. My favorite hockey team, the Detroit Red Wings. My favorite English Premier League team, Tottenham Hotspur. There's also a question about that later. And I could probably think of some others, but that's probably enough. JB Subscribes asks, what's your favorite train journey so far and what made it memorable? On one of my few trips to Europe, my wife and I took the Eurostar from London to Paris and then back in one day, which was really great. I was able to get first class tickets for not a whole lot more, and that may be the way they are all the time. I wouldn't know. And so we got to sit in really nice seats, and we got waited on. And I thought the trip through the tunnel under the English Channel would be a really kind of memorable thing, but it's really just like 20-25 minutes of darkness. But that was great. It made it memorable because my wife and I were together. It was our first trip to Paris. We just stayed for kind of the day, had a day trip, and just went to museums and walked around. But that was really great. Thank you for that question, by the way. That brought back fond memories. Robert from Barter Hordes asked what my retirement plans are. I think they're pretty straightforward. I'm going to fish. I'm going to write. I'm going to read. I hope to be able to travel. And I'll try to figure out what my second career will be. Given the likely state of the United States economy, I'm considering doing adjunct professor work for the next couple of years. Which would not be full-time teaching, but I am considering that because I'm worried that we may need a little extra income, and that would be one thing I could do. Alan Braswell asks, if you could go back and redo any of your videos, which one or more than one would you redo and why? I can only really think of one video that I would redo, and that is a review I did early on my channel of Louise Erdrich's novel, La Rose. It was one of those occasions where I just tried to do too much. I gave too much plot information, and it just got confusing. It wasn't a very good video. Mary Tumulty asks, have you read any of the novels of 20th century interwar writer Sinclair Lewis? The answer is yes. I've only read one of his novels, and that was Aerosmith. And to be honest with you, I didn't really like it. Oddly, I've read two biographies of Sinclair Lewis. One by, Mark Schorer, I think is a great example of what went wrong with biography writing sometime in the 1970s, where every biographer thought they had to find some kind of traumatic childhood event and then use that to explain everything that happened, or every attitude the writer or the historical figure had. And another was written by somebody who actually got in touch with me, from information I had which could help him with his research. And I read that one too. I much preferred the second, but right now I can't remember the name of the author, and it's in a different room. Winnie Li asks, what are your top 5 favorite Balzac novels and why? This is an ever-changing list, but I looked at the Balzac books this morning, and this is the list I came up with. In reverse order, number 5, The Wrong Side of Paris, because that's the first Balzac novel I read, and it was great. 4 and 3 are related. That's Lost Illusions and A Harlot High and Low. Both these books tell the stories of Lucien Beaupré, and it features the thief and master criminal Vacherin. I'm going to mispronounce his name. And they both kind of involve a lot of, I think, the most important characters and most memorable characters of in Balzac's fiction, and a female character featured in both, whose name right now I cannot remember, and that's terrible. But anyway, they're both just great. You can read one and not the other, but together they kind of pick up the same characters. Number 2, Eugénie Grandet, short Balzac novel about a young woman who is disappointed in love and then really takes control of her life, which I think made her happy, but I think the ending can be read in different ways. And right now, number 1 is The Black Sheep, because The Black Sheep kind of features a story of a young man who does the right things unlike his older brother, and miraculously everything works out, even though you didn't think it would. I guess I'm sentimental that way. Debbie Baker asks, how did I become a fan of the Tottenham Hotspurs? Well, that has to do with Clint Dempsey. Clint Dempsey was, in some ways, maybe one of the most successful American soccer players, football players to play in Europe, and he played in the Premier League for Tottenham Hotspur a few years back. So I liked Tottenham because he was an American playing on that team, but additionally, Clint Dempsey was born and grew up in the town where I went to college, so I felt a greater connection. I started watching Premier League kind of just as something to do on Saturday and Sunday mornings when there wasn't football, American football, and I really fell in love with the game. And I was told that you had to have a team, and once you picked your team, you couldn't choose a different team, and so for Clint Dempsey reasons, I went with Tottenham. Kerry asks 2 questions. Says I can choose either or both. So the first is easy. What are the names of your dogs? The big dog, who's in here most of the time, who's hard to see because she's black and she blends in, that's our Great Dane Zelda. We got her as a rescue about 1.5 years ago. Our other dog is what I'm going to call a mutt. He's a mixed breed dog. His name is Ike. He's really fluffy. He's the one who makes all the noise. He's about 12 years old, 13, and we got him after Hurricane Ike. He was a stray that a friend of ours found, and we took him in, and so we've had him for a long time. And then she asked or Kerry asked, what were your feelings about the Houston Astros cheating scandal? I was devastated. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I have not forgiven them. I waited my entire life. You should know that the Astros are the team I've been a fan of the longest and most consistently for my life, and I'm 52. I have been waiting for at least 46 years for the Astros to win a World Series. They finally did. It was great. I bought all kinds of Astros World Series merchandise, which, by the way, I used to wear on my channel, and then I found out that they're dirty cheaters. They're dirty cheaters. They cheated. I haven't forgiven them. Jen from Remember Reads asks, what's been the strangest experience you've had since joining BookTube? And then she says, do you see more or fewer trolls here than on your fishing channel? And most importantly, can you share some dog videos with us? So the questions first. I was doing for a while a series, or last year I did a series called Poetry for Beginners, and as a part of that series, I covered a poem by Seamus Heaney, and I read the poem. As part of that series, I always read the poem. So I read the poem, and the video went out, and not a lot of people watch poetry videos, which is fine. I had a really great time putting those videos together and doing them. But then like a few months went by, and I got a comment that said, I ruined the poem by reading it, that my accent and my pronunciation were terrible, and I should never read, Heaney again, that I was misrepresenting his lilting use of language and I didn't understand it at all based on the reading, which I think is fair on the whole. I'm not a great reader of poetry, but what surprised me was that I actually had put a link in the show notes prominently of Heaney actually reading that exact same poem. And so there was this back and forth. We went back and forth, and I pointed those things out. And eventually that person and I came to an understanding and parted friends, I guess. So then do you see more trolls on BookTube than on the fishing channel? And I don't get any trolls on my fishing channel. People on the fishing channel, for the most part, don't troll one another because most fishing channel people are armed. They have guns, and I don't think people like the idea of messing with them as much. So I guess I don't get trolled here either. I know it's a much bigger problem for female booktubers than for male booktubers, of which it makes me feel terrible. But essentially, I don't really have any trolling experiences. I've had some kind of arguments with a few booktubers in my comment section. I think most of those have been resolved, and I think some of those people are still my subscribers, and they comment regularly, and we get along just fine. But I think that's about it. And then I'll insert video of the dogs here. Ike. No, it's perfect. Stella, stop. Stop. Next question came from Graham over at the archive, formerly Graham Quigley. He has 3 questions. First, if you could have a dinner party or a social gathering with any 4 authors of the past or present, who would they be? I've written the answer to this question so many times that I'm not sure I remember. But I'm going to go with my 4 right now. It would be Toni Morrison. My goodness, that would be awesome to be able to sit down with Toni Morrison. William Trevor, I'm not sure how talkative he was. Eudora Welty, just because in interviews she just seems like such a lovely person and a great short story writer. And then Louise Erdrich, who is probably my favorite author right now. He asked then, what are your top 3 favorite movies? In no particular order, because I have a hard time with movies and my movie list changes all the time. Inside Llewyn Davis by the Coen brothers, The Maltese Falcon, classic. I just love the dialogue in The Maltese Falcon. It's amazing. And then Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, starring Paul Newman and Robert Redford and Catherine Ross, because, man, is that a good-looking cast. The movie itself is as dude bro as you can get. There you go, I worked it in. It's as dude bro as you can get, but I just love it. A Western with a sense of humor, and Catherine Ross, Robert Redford, Paul Newman. Steve Donoghue asked, in his scolding way, if you were out hiking alone in the Sierras without a cell phone and you fell into a ravine and ended up trapped under a log, doomed to a slow, lingering death from hunger, thirst, and exposure, how do you think you'd feel about the stubborn, elaborate lengths you are currently going to in order to procrastinate on writing? And I said, if this is what happened to me, worrying about my incomplete writing project would be number 37 on the list of things I was pissed off about. 1 would be not having a cell phone. 2 would be falling. 3 would be how'd I get trapped under a log. 4 would be I'm hungry. Anyway, you see what I'm saying. Steve also, Steve and I kind of poke fun about this dude bro thing, go back and forth, and we've actually had a great conversation, I think, about it. But occasionally people think that, I think that people think we're actually angry. He asked, do you really think there are people out there who don't see how much we enjoy jousting with each other about, well, the dude bro thing and everything? And I'm just telling you right now, let me repeat again, if you think there's any hostility between Steve Donoghue and I about dude bro issues or anything else, there's not. I have enjoyed it thoroughly. Exactly one of the things I got into BookTube for was to have conversations and engage in conversations, not just with people who agreed with me, but people who I disagree with and who disagree with me. That is what real dialogue is. Marc Nash asks, he says, my question is, what was your sporting career like? What standard did you reach? What was your favorite sport to play? He says marble racing is not a sport for the purpose of this question. And were you on any teams that had someone who went on to be a pro sports player? My sports career was undistinguished. What standard did you reach? I played American football through about 10th grade, and I was not a good football player. You should know high school football in Texas is, and I'm not joking, takes on almost religious qualities, and that was even more so back in the 80s. We're a little more jaded than we used to be about Texas high school football, which is not a bad thing. But I was not particularly good. In part, this had to do with size and speed. I'm slow. I am really slow. I'm probably the slowest person you know. If you think you run slower than me, we should have a race. I'm slow. I'm not blessed with speed, which is important in almost every sport. And second, when I was in high school, I was relatively small. I think when I was a sophomore in high school, I was maybe 5'7", and I might have weighed 150, 155 pounds. Which is not good because being slow meant that I was a lineman, which meant size and strength mattered. And so in spring football, I broke my thumb and my forefinger in spring football practice, and I had to sit out for the rest of summer, and I really liked not playing football, so I just stopped, and no one cried. My favorite sport to play was baseball, and if I have a regret about sports, it's that I didn't keep playing baseball longer. I don't think I could have made my high school baseball team. Even though I grew up in a relatively small town, we only had one high school, and both our high school football and baseball teams were pretty exceptionally good, and still are, and there's no way I was making that team either. I probably wouldn't have risen much beyond where I was, but I do regret not continuing to play baseball because I liked baseball, and that's probably the sport I was best at. I could throw field, given my limited speed, and I was a pretty good hitter. And then, were you on any team that had someone who became a pro sports player? The answer to that is no. I never played on a team with anyone who became a professional athlete. However, I taught someone who became a professional athlete. He was a professional baseball player. He was a relief pitcher for the Cincinnati Reds in the mid-'90s, and as a matter of fact, he won the National League Rookie of the Year award. And then my brother-in-law played college and professional football. He was a professional football player, American football player in the NFL for 2 seasons, and then in a different league for another 2 seasons. So there's that. Roz from Scallydandling About the Books says, my question is, which book sums up your reading as a teenager or a young adult? Which reading habits and which book sums up the reading habits, the close to retirement version of Brian? And is there a book that straddles both the Brians? And then can you tell me your favorite breakfast instead? So I'm afraid my answers to the first questions are going to be obvious to anybody who watched the channel. My teenager books were The Lord of the Rings. I used to just read The Lord of the Rings and get to the end of The Return of the King, and I would just start The Fellowship of the Ring again. And there were probably 2 years when that's mostly what I read, and I just read them in that fashion. So that would be me, kind of the youngster, young teen, young adult me. College, that's when the Hemingway thing hit, and so The Sun Also Rises. I just thought, unfortunately for me, I thought that lifestyle would be great when I was a young person. I'm glad that wasn't permanently damaged by that. And then I think the retirement me would be Balzac. I think if you had gone back and I could have read The Black Sheep, if you'd made me read The Black Sheep at any point, that would be a book which probably connected us together. Kind of the sentimental, kind of the underdog story. With kind of the partying aspect in there too, with the other brother and the black sheep. That would be my book. And then my favorite breakfast is Huevos Rancheros. This is a kind of a Tex-Mex version of, as the name implies, eggs. It's really spicy, lots of salsa, their tortillas, their beans. Anyway, that's my favorite. And when I was in college, there used to be a restaurant in college which stayed open all night called the Hot Biscuit. How southern can a restaurant name be? The Hot Biscuit made great Huevos Rancheros, which, after a night of colleging, oftentimes, a couple of cups of strong black coffee and some really spicy food helped to kind of smooth out the next day. Still my favorite breakfast. Madeline from Made with Books asks, I would like to know your favorite childhood book, what your favorite childhood book was, and what countries you've traveled to. So my favorite childhood book was called The Nobby Boys. It was one of those, picture books with not a whole lot of words, but a hardback book. The Nobby Boys were a raccoon and a crow and a fox. and they were friends, and they played dominoes, and they rescue a baby bear and return it to its mother. That was my favorite story or book as a kid. And then I just talked about this, but about countries I've traveled to. The 3 countries I've traveled to are Ireland, England, and France. So those are the 3 countries I would love to have traveled more, and I would love to travel more. Michael Moore says, a question for your Q&A. Do you read ebooks like Kindle or listen to audiobooks? No ebooks yet, even though I'm advised that given my eyesight, that's the direction I should try to move. I still just love the experience of the physical book, but I will have to get over it at some point if I continue to read, because I need to be able to change the size of the print. And then audiobooks, yes, and I've talked about this before, but I do love listening to audiobooks of long classics like Dickens on long car trips. That really makes things better. Lillian Neiswender asks, my question is, what author, living or dead, would you like to have dinner with? James Baldwin. I would be scared, intimidated, probably not be willing to say anything the whole time. But if I could just get him talking for just a little while, I think that would be an incredibly transformative and marvelous experience for me. I just admire his writing. I admire his courage. I admire his intellect. Just a great admirer. Then Kazen from Always Doing said, did you always know you wanted to be a history teacher, or is it a job you fell into? The answer is yes. Even when I didn't know, I knew. I used to my friends and I, with my sister, we used to play school, and I was always the history teacher, and I would lecture to my friends about, I don't know, the Revolutionary War or Native Americans, and so I've always wanted to do that. And plus, I like the lifestyle. My mom was a teacher, my sister's a teacher, her mother was a teacher, my dad was a teacher for a while. My grandmother on one side was a teacher, and I like the lifestyle. I tell people all the time, I don't make as much money as a teacher as lots of people do who have, the degrees I have and are professionals, but I get a lot of time off, and I value my free time a lot. And teaching allows me to earn enough money to live an above average lifestyle, partly thanks to my wife working and making more money than me. And then to have time to be with my family, time to read, time to fish, time to write, time to do whatever I want to, and that's been really valuable to me. And then she also asked, what's a book that you love but no one else seems to have read? I thought about this for a while, and I'm just going to go with a book called The Sotweed Factor by John Barth. It's a kind of farcical, historical fiction set in the colony of Maryland. It involves, mistaken identity, hidden identity, and Isaac Newton. And I found it to be pretty funny. I think it's a funnier, less intense read than Thomas Pynchon's Mason and Dixon, which is set kind of in the same time period, even though I think Mason and Dixon is a better work of fiction on the whole. And then Maria Jesus Tovar de Dios asks, could you explain something about what you're writing and what you've already written? So what I've already written. I used to write test questions as an item writer, kind of as a technical writer, write questions for multiple choice tests. I wrote a study guide for the state of Georgia about American history, the first half of American history and Georgia history. In doing my master's degree, I did research about American author, activist, and former Marine Thomas Boyd, who was the author of a really important piece of American World War I fiction, which is still far too unknown. But I wrote a biography of him for my master's thesis. My graduate advisor suggested that I might be able to get it published if I could find a little bit more information, and so I did more research, and I ended up turning the master's thesis into a short biography of Thomas Boyd, and I was lucky enough to have that published by the University of Akron Press. I think that was published in 2008. It's been a long time. As a part of that experience, I also published an article about Thomas Boyd in Minnesota Historical Magazine and in the Ohio History Quarterly. And I wrote a book review for Minnesota History as well. And that's been about it. What I'm working on now, and again, Steve Donoghue would say, what I'm working on far too slowly, not paying enough attention to, is a military history of the military unit my great uncle That would be my father's uncle, who was really important to my father. A military history of the unit that he served in the Pacific during World War II. And what I'm trying to do is to do something I don't see done very often. Oftentimes with unit histories, you get kind of the big picture overview, or you get individual soldiers who are in that unit writing kind of their memoir. So you either get the big picture or the small picture. And what I'm trying to do in that book is provide the picture all the way down, from big unit to smaller unit, so it goes from division to regiment to battalion to company to squad, and then to my uncle's experiences himself, with kind of trying to connect all those. And what I hope is that it gives an overall picture of how the big decisions affected the little person, because oftentimes when you read just the individual soldier's account of what took place, how what they did fits in with the bigger picture isn't really clear. That's what I'm hoping I can achieve. But it has been a slow process, and I would say that writing nonfiction is not something that you can just do because you have to tie it to the sources. Your research has to be correct, and that has been difficult. It's a lot of letter reading and unit history reading, and I have to get it all in my head first, and then begin the process of writing, and then not lose confidence. I've gotten about 4 chapters of that done. I think it's probably going to be about 10 chapters long, and then when I get it written, I'll see if some university press or something like that is interested in publishing it. I'm not sure that will take place, but that's what I'm writing. Anyway, there you go. Those are the questions. I want to thank you all again for submitting your questions, and thank you again for your support and for putting up with this long video for my Saturday Hodgepodge. As always, look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and thank you for watching.